Good afternoon. I hereby call the February 20th, 2025 meeting of the Staunton Planning Commission to order. The first item on our agenda is approval of the January 16, 2025 meeting minutes. Any changes?
Madam Chair, I think under approval of the minutes from the December meeting, I should have been listed as not voting because I wasn't here.
Okay,
Like I wasn't here for December, so I abstained on
okay.
Any other changes?
I would like to ask, I was here in the audience and I was not sworn, so I was not on the podium or able to vote. But I was here and I wondered if I could be listed under the also attending section. I'd like it noted that I was in attendance at my first meeting.
It's a good question.
So, and that was before you were actually sworn in though,
I
correct?
wasn't, yeah, I hadn't taken the oath, but I had been appointed.
Mr. Heartless?
I think we could probably note that somewhere in the minutes
Yeah.
that he was here and he had been appointed but not yet sworn.
Yes.
All
Thank you.
right. Any other changes?
Okay, Madam Chair, I recommend we approve the minutes of the January 16th meeting with those two changes.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the January 16, 2025 meetings as amended. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wiegand,
Aye.
Mr. Hanson,
Aye.
Mr. Hutchinson,
I
Mr. Kessiker. Aye. Ms. Robinson,
Aye.
motion carries.
All right. Several of the items on the agenda tonight are public hearings. After the staff report is given for each item and the commission has had the opportunity to ask questions of staff, I will then open the public hearing. We will first give the applicant, if there is one, the opportunity to make any comments about the request, and then we will open up the floor to comments from the public and then from Zoom, if there is anyone on Zoom. All speakers that are here should please come to the podium at the front and first provide us with their name and address. We ask that the applicant limit any comments to 10 minutes and that all other speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes. With that, we'll turn to item 3A on the agenda, public hearing and consideration of the City of Staunton, Virginia Capital Improvement Plan 2026-2030. And Jesse Moyers, the Chief Financial Officer for the city, will give the staff report for that.
Good evening. How are you guys?
Good.
I believe we have a couple staff members here. If you have questions about projects that they could help with, they're welcome to chime in too. So these slides will be familiar to you. These are the same slides from January, minus a few when the introduction was done. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop me since you have now had time to kind of read through the report a little more. So as you said, we have the public hearing tonight, and then we are scheduled, I will do an introduction of the CIP to the City Council next Thursday during the work session. And eventually it will be adopted at the end of their second meeting in April, which is the same time that the budget is scheduled to be adopted. The 5-year CIP is $75,444,767. And it's broken out there as the following, $35.5 million for the general fund. The only change with the general fund between when I introduced it and now is that I added an amount for the Uniontown for the paving and roads, because we did get some estimates that I could use there in that section. In addition, I had to change some of the funding sources for the FY26 through FY30 general fund CIP, because there's just not going to be enough money in the operating budget to fund more of the CIP from operations, and we're still going to have to rely on carryover to fund a majority of that CIP. Water fund is a little over 24 million. Sewer fund is about 7.8. There was some changes in funding sources for sewer. As you know, we did do a sewer fee increase this year, but we had went, I believe it was 12 years prior to that without an increase. So it is still hard to fund some of the sewer CIP out of the operations. And I had to change the funding sources there too. And then we do have a few projects that you'll see later on out that are currently unfunded, but they're still on the schedule. So they're not unfunded, unscheduled. We will just have to determine in the next couple fiscal years if that funding can come out of operations or if we'll have it in the fund balance, or there could be the possibility that we need to issue debt to do those two projects. Environmental fund is almost 1.4 million, and then schools is about 3 million. Just want to review the new reserves that we have in the general fund. We're adding one for affordable housing and workforce housing, starting at 30,000 and building up to 50,000 per year over the next 5 years. We're adding a reserve for the police department relocation, what we're calling phase 1. Just hoping to start saving up money now so that when the time comes to buy a parcel to start that project, we'll have some cash to put toward it. But that is not in the near future. This is just the start of a reserve for that. Fire station number 1 improvements. This is a new reserve that we're building on that was kind of started a couple years ago to replace the roof. So there's a little bit of money there that we're starting with. The goal is 3 to 4 million to take the roof construction from inverted to the normal roof construction and adding additional space for firefighters. So this will take several years to save up that money as well. And then a few other CIP reserves is starting back the golf cart replacement fund so that we don't have to buy them all at once. The schedule is to do 10 a year. And then starting an equipment reserve for parks and rec equipment. They have several equipment replacement requests in the operating budget, but unfortunately, we're not able to fund those. So we're adding a CIP reserve very similar to what we do for Public Works. So the new sidewalk reserve, this is not new, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because we're really going to try to beef up what we are putting in that fund. Historically, it was $100,000 a year. FY26, we're going to try to fund at 300,000 and then build up to where we're putting in $500,000 a year. Parks and Rec, this is not a new one. This is one that it started as the Moxie renovation, but now it's more general. It's Parks and Rec public use facilities with the main focus starting off on the Gypsy Hill Park pool house replacement and then the bathrooms at both parks and then upgrades to the pool house at Montgomery Hall Park and then the pump house at Gypsy Hill. So that's our main focus with those projects. The slide is just an overview of the different Uniontown projects. The only thing that changed since the introduction is I put that figure in there under CD 3001, the 6.4 million for the Uniontown roadway and pedestrian infrastructure improvements. The Churchville Avenue streetscape, that's just I think it's planned for FY27 to start the design and then construction 2 fiscal years later. This is just a few of the other smaller projects in the general fund. Water fund, I don't think there's anything that has changed here since the introduction. I did talk to the Director of Public Works, Dave Irvin, because a question had come up about the unfunded list and why North River was not a priority anymore. And his response was that Gardner Springs improvements, once they're complete, Gardner Springs could supply the city's water if we needed it to, if something were to happen to North River while the repairs were being made. He also said that there are more important projects that we need to focus on before we return to North River. And that's the Clearwell replacement and the Richmond Avenue water line. He said then after those projects, then we will focus our attention back on the North River pipeline. Sewer fund, like I said, the only change since the introduction is that I had to move the Lewis Creek sanitary sewer line replacement, the construction of phase 3 and 4 to the unfunded list that will be determined later. And then the Locust Avenue sewer for 900,000. That will need to be determined at a later time. Stormwater, there have been no changes here since it was introduced in January. And then schools, there have been no changes to the school CIP since the introduction in January. So did you have any questions after reading through the CIP since the January meeting? And if not, we can do the public hearing and I will stick around in case there are questions that come up during that.
I guess if
Oh, go
nobody
ahead.
else will, I'll throw some questions out there.
Okay.
So just, and forgive me, because this is only the second time I've been through this process, and the first time was really a blur, in all fairness. Just as a general concept, there's some projects that are being funded that there's really no target for per se, but then there's other projects that are somewhat immediate that go unfunded. Why? I guess is the first
Do you
question.
have specific
Okay,
examples?
so specifically, okay, so like in FY 2026, I think it is, it might be, yeah, because we're in 25 now. I think it's us as FY 26. We have to have funds to help our portion of the governor's school rehabilitation. Okay, and it's
Yes, I
showing
believe
as
that's an
unfunded.
unfunded
Correct.
project for
But
schools.
it's scheduled for soon, actually. But then
Oh.
like the police station, we're saying, maybe at some point, sometime, somewhere, we might build a new police station and we're gonna fund that. Like what sort of goes through that process of why this but not that, even though there's sort of a target deadline on some of these things?
I would not say that that 9.9 million there is scheduled for the second phase of the renovation to the Governor School. I do not know if the other localities, if they have the funding, Augusta County and Waynesboro, to
Okay.
make phase two happen. So I don't think that one is scheduled
Okay.
at this point. If
Okay.
it does become scheduled, then we're going to have some serious conversations with council because the funding is not identified for that $10 million.
So even though it's sort of like place markered, it doesn't necessarily mean it's happening, is
Right.
what you're saying. Okay.
Right. These three things on the school's unfunded list will not be happening until funding can be identified. And
Gotcha.
as of right now, it has not been.
Okay.
Just like the police station and the fire department improvements, we're starting those reserves just so that in a few years, or it may take more than a few years, we'll have some cash and not have to take out debt for those things, but they're not going to happen anytime in the near future because
Sure.
it will take time to save up for those.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
The police station is in this building now, right?
Yes, it's currently in the basement.
And is it just too crowded or?
Yes, it is. From what I hear, yes, it is too
It's getting
crowded.
crowded with you?
Mhm.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for all of this and all your hard work. And with that, I will open the public hearing. If there's anyone that would like to speak to this matter, please come up to the podium. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
No, ma'am, we have no one with their hand raised.
Okay, well then if you'll please state your name and address.
Yeah, Clinton Davis, 219 Sunnyside Street. Now, on the police station, in 1966, 67, there was a thing before this city hall, they were supposed to build a municipal building. And it was supposed to include a fire department and police department. And from what I understand, it never happened. That was in 66 and 67. And then I live on Sunnyside and the Baptist Street, I can say I can speak for the folks up in Sunnyside, Baptist Street was supposed to get some sewer. I mean, benefits. Only thing they did on Caroline Street down there in the Marinos, they did in 1967, they did a massive drainage. And right there, and that was all they did. And we still have problems with the sewer, with the water drainage coming off of Tams, off of running down underneath one gentleman's house between Tams and Rhodes and all the water coming down into Baptist, and they got rocks right beside it. Used to be a chicken coop, and the apartments they're there and running right down into Baptist Street into Caroline, and then behind the houses on Augusta Street, where my aunt used to live, right there on the corner, right beside the Shifley Cleaners, she had to put she died in 2000 or so. Take it back, 98, and her twin sister died at the same time. They had to use pumps to pump out that water right beside the house. There was a Taylor house right beside the Shifley Cleaners every time it rained. It was about 3 feet of water in there before and she said if she smoked, she would blow the house up because they rented the house from Mrs. Taylor. And that's still going on. And all I think the main drainage is right there in the center right underneath of the stoplight at Churchville Avenue and Augusta Street. Right there, where they put that island in there. There used to be a crossover coming off of New Street running over to Churchville Avenue. But I can't tell you how many people I'm waiting for waiting for some more accidents to turn. They turn around that island trying to get over there to Churchville Avenue. And they have to go all the way down to Pump Street and go back up Lewis Street. And the same way going around the library, which was former Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, to come back down, I think it's Oakenwall, to come to that stoplight to get out there on Churchville Avenue. And they did all this renovation to widen Churchville Avenue, but they forgot about right there in front of the Coke plant, all that used to be. And if you go back to the archives, you'll see it. And we never got no answers. They all passed that over. And those poor people over there on Baptist Street, Caroline, right now, got water coming down there like you wouldn't believe. And when Maria came through here, the fire department came up there and a tree fell across the street and almost missed this one lady's house by 12 inches. And all that water was running down Baptist Street like a river, and it still does. But that's never been addressed. And see, the water lines run Sunnyside, Augusta. The sewer runs Baptist. And nobody has said anything to the Wiseman. And I said, like, Adam Campbell came up, he was sitting talking, but I told somebody, we have never seen city council up in 40 years. They used to do tours through there. And they came up there, but they forgot about us. So I told somebody, I said, don't ever bring them back up here. They ain't been up here in 40 years. Why you bring them up here now? And Adam, he came before he ran. He came up there when they had a playground up there, right there off of Caroline. Talked to the local people. But we ain't seen nobody in 40 years. He was the first one to come up there in 40 years. See, in the 80s, when Mrs. Rita Wilson and all, I had her come up there, and Schaefer was the fire chief. And one lady, somebody hit the fire hydrant on the corner of Tams and Sunnyside, and Mrs. Rita Wilson with Schaefer, fire chief, came up and replaced the water, the fire hydrants, which is one is down in front of the Elks now, and the other one's right there where Marybone has their soccer field. And that's another thing. When Marybone put that soccer field up at $750,000, we got water coming down there on Tam Street, undermining the street. Right now, past tense, and that wall that was up there, they put a dry wall up there. They might well have been, whatever they wasted, that was a dry wall, not a bit of concrete up there. And one part of it fell down a few years ago. That was the one that had the concrete and had the trees. Right now, the other part right there on the corner, right there off of Tams, that fell in too, because it doesn't have no infrastructure underneath of it, and the water just goes right across to that guy's yard. And right there where that house is, there was a street, there's two streets. One's in Hastings and the other one's Lee Street that runs right behind the houses on Sunnyside. And nobody's, just this past rain You see, we have a lake right there on Tam Street. So like I said, nobody has addressed all these years, has never addressed none of this.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. I don't know what to say about what happened with the police station, the fire station in the sixties, but clearly they're planning for it now. And thank you for the history and that area with the water and the sewer.
You're welcome.
And Madam Chair, we did have they did do some work with the drainage when we looked at the Elks Lodge, having events come in there several years ago, pre-COVID. So something has been done, but it doesn't sound like it's anywhere near enough.
Is there anyone else? Still no one on Zoom? Okay. With that, I'll close the public hearing. The matter rests with the commission.
Okay. Madam Chair, I move that the Planning Commission recommend adoption of the City of Staunton Capital Improvement Plan fiscal year 2026 through fiscal year 2030, excuse me.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the planning commission recommend adoption of the City of Staunton Capital Improvement Plan fiscal year 2026 to fiscal year 2030. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Hanson,
Aye.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Aye.
Mr. Kessiker,
Aye.
Ms. Wiegand,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
The capital improvement and plan has been recommended for adoption and the matter will be heard by the city council.
So the CIP does not require a public hearing with
Okay.
council, but it will be presented to council on February the 27th, with some additional discussion on April 3rd and anticipated adoption on April 24th.
Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda is item 3B, public hearing and consideration of amendments to Title 18 zoning of the Staunton City Code to revise references to the recently amended Title 13 environmental. Mr. Hartless, planning manager for the city, will present the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you said, recently, City Council amended Title 13 environmental of the city code. There are a few places in the zoning code where Title 13 is referenced, so we needed to amend our zoning ordinance to either eliminate or change those references so that we're referencing the correct code sections. So there were two areas that we needed to change. Section 18.83.050. We needed to eliminate that reference to a provision that's no longer in Title 13. And then Section 18.169, we needed to change the reference there from 13.05 to the new section, which is 13.01. So staff is recommending that Planning Commission recommend approval of this zoning code amendment.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? All right, then with that, I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this matter? Zoom?
No, ma'am.
All right, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and the matter rests with the commission.
Madam Chair, unless anybody else wants to talk, I'll be happy to make a motion.
Please go ahead.
Great. On the basis that the amendment would serve the interest of public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practice, I move that Planning Commission recommend approval of the necessary amendments to Title 18 zoning.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded. The planning commission recommend approval of the requested zoning text amendment to Title 18 of the Staunton City Code. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Kessiker,
Aye.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Aye.
Mr. Hanson,
Aye.
Ms. Wiegand,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. And then this will go before council.
This will go before council at their March 13th meeting, and that'll be at 7 p.m. in this room.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 3C, public hearing and consideration of amendments to Chapter 18.85 H1 Historic Preservation District of Title 18 zoning of the Staunton City Code. Ms. Nesselrod, zoning administrator for the city, will present the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At its December meeting, Planning Commission authorized staff to work with the Historic Preservation Commission to draft proposed changes to the H1 Historic Preservation District ordinance. The proposed changes include amendments to definitions, administrative processing of certificates, an exception to the guidelines, adding additional items for administrative review, and updating and maintenance provision. Staff included in the proposed amendments in your packet for consideration and public hearing. I outlined in the briefing the changes, starting with definitions. The proposed changes to definitions will better align the city ordinance with the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation and guidelines for rehabilitating historic buildings for construction, rehabilitation, and restoration. Our current ordinance did not provide a definition for preservation, so we included that. In addition to updating definitions, the HPC, Historic Preservation Commission, is proposing a revision to the definition of repairs to require that the HPC review any work or replacement in kind when the work or replacement exceeds 50% of the building element. This proposed change is to address problems that have occurred in recent years with replacement of roof surfaces, specifically with improper installation of historic standing seam metal roofing, and where porches or decks have been removed and replaced with in-kind materials, but have resulted in a total reconstruction where important elements have been lost. In regards to administrative processing of applications, we're proposing throughout the chapter, there's small changes are proposed to update how certificates are processed, clarification on treatment types, and updating the responsible person to inspect for conformance with the chapter. Exceptions to guidelines in cases where the HPC deems it necessary. This change will grant the HPC the availability to deviate from the historic district design guidelines when approving a certificate for proposed alterations if the proposed changes do not change the character of the district. Under administrative review, the current ordinance allows the review of signage to be completed administratively. This process includes the review and issuance of a sign permit by city staff, along with a recommendation by Historic Staunton Foundation to ensure the proposed signage meets the city sign regulations and complies with the Staunton Historic District guidelines. This process generally takes about 10 business days, so it cuts the time in half. To reduce the application review time for minor changes that are appropriate treatments for historic buildings, the HPC is proposing to include 3 additional items to be reviewed administratively. These include screening of mechanical equipment, removal of vinyl or metal siding to expose the original siding, and removal of gutters to install metal half-round gutters, which are appropriate in the districts. As I said, this administrative review will reduce review times from a 4-week waiting period for a full HPC review to 10 business days. Moving on to update of a maintenance provision, this includes further guidance that painting with products causing alteration and potential damage of exterior surfaces, including application of liquid siding products, are not exempted from review by the HPC. Staff recommends that Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed changes to SCC 18.85 H1 Historic Preservation District.
Any questions before I open the public hearing?
I do have one.
Yeah.
I was looking at exception to the guidelines, which is M on page 15, line 512, and a few after that. I can understand why that allowing the Historic District Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission to resolve design guideline conflicts with the zoning ordinance, but I'm a little bit nervous about whether this is going to be perceived as a giant loophole. I don't see any guidance in here. They say substantial justification in here is that why, when you can do it, when the Historic Preservation can do that. And I'm a little nervous that we're putting the Historic Preservation in a commission in a place where anybody can walk in with some kind of what sounds like reasonable justification, and they're going to be in the hot seat. So I'm a little bit nervous about that part.
So this came up believe it was around 2019, because when we originally first started looking at changes in regards to being able to put something in there. And it's just it would be a deviation from the historic district design guidelines where it may be an instance where it's appropriate for the district, but the guidelines don't give them, they have to adhere to those guidelines where it may impose something on the property owner that really shouldn't,
Okay,
and to be used very minimally with proper justification. So it's something that where you wouldn't set a precedent and you would specifically say the reason for it in using the National Park Service's guidelines and standards along with ours.
okay, thank you.
Does that create an issue for the zoning administrator though? Because if I'm following up on what she's thinking, if the Historic Preservation Society is allowed to designate what's allowed, what could be allowed to not adhere to the zoning ordinance, but then the zoning administrator is the one signing the certificate of appropriateness. If he or she doesn't agree with that, does that kind of create a quite the conflict?
It would be specific to the guidelines, not the ordinance. This exception would only be to the guidelines.
Can you give us an example? Because this jumped out at me too, that seemed, it was very open-ended and
Sometimes when you look at a roof, if there is a roof material that is no longer in existence and it's at its lifespan, it's been on there for 75 years and there's different types on that. Or if you're in a neighborhood where the whole neighborhood has a certain type of window and you are in the type of house and the type of window and you're in a neighborhood where it wouldn't be detrimental to approve something with, all right, for instance, windows that have clearly defined lights versus ones that have the tapes in it, like the artificial tapes or something like that, where it wouldn't affect the neighborhood and change the district. I know it's hard to explain.
So it's justification to deviate from the historic district guidelines, not to deviate from the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
Yep.
So it wouldn't put the zoning, it would not put
Okay.
me in
Okay,
a position where it would be in conflict with the ordinance.
that makes sense. It feels a little arbitrary though. Like, or is that a lot of these guidelines are just sort of like, if you're okay with it, we can, we can pass it kind of thing. Like, I don't know.
Don't ask that question.
I'm sorry. I rescind my question.
well, I guess,
Guidelines can get pretty specific in
Okay,
areas where it wouldn't apply to a specific district, historic district, like where there's the 5 different historic districts, where it may apply to one but not another. And whether or not, and also in relation to the buildings, how historic the building is
right.
and the material that they're trying to preserve.
Could you give maybe a tiny bit more extended version of the roof example that you said? Because I've been on a couple of historic district-led walks where we're looking at a tin roof that's 75 years old and you can't get them anymore unless you luck out and somebody sells you one for a small fortune. But I mean, there are things that happens. Can you explain how that might?
Generally, in cases with roofs, like you see a lot of slate roofs that there's not a alternative material for that. And they wouldn't necessarily use this for that because now generally they will approve a stand and seam metal roof, but it is a different material.
Yes.
Can you think of the specific case where that came up? I'm thinking it was the windows in a house that was not historic, that they had replaced the windows and it was going to cost them, it was as far as the house wasn't a very historic house and they had replaced the windows and it was a financial burden and it wouldn't have affected the district. And so they were trying to work with the citizen, but they were held to the standard, whereas they
okay.
could have approved the windows that they put in.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe a better example.
I have two more follow-up questions. One, does substantial justification, does that have a legal definition?
You mean how many legal definitions does it
We
have?
do not in the ordinance define it. It would be up to the commission with all of their knowledge and adherence to the guidelines to make that call.
I guess I'm looking at it from, with my lawyer hat on and asking if that is, you know, even under federal or state law, like substantial justification is somewhere defined. Like clear and convincing evidence, like that's,
Mhm.
you know, in the criminal law, like that's defined, or a preponderance of the, you know, there's case law and definition. Did we just make up the term substantial justification, or does that have some legal significance?
It does not have a legal significance. That it was the commission felt that if they felt like it was justified,
It's not defined in the,
it is not.
what were those? The National Park Service guidelines either?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Has the city attorney looked at all these changes?
They received them in their packet,
Okay. All right,
for review before this meeting,
okay.
as well as they get the Historic Preservation Commission packets as well, and it was in there.
All right, and then my second question is, it's prefaced by the commission may when there's a conflict in local zoning ordinance and historic designation. So I guess what would the conflict be? I don't see how the roof example, that is what the conflict is between local zoning ordinance and the guidelines.
That would be in the instance, you guys have all the good questions.
That's why Tim gave you this one. He knew this was
Well, you
gonna
know
be-
what?
He's like, we're changing some numbers on the first one.
No, it's in regards to where the ordinance, the guidelines do not allow accessory buildings in a side yard. Whereas the zoning ordinance allows buildings in a side yard. And in some cases, in some of the districts, buildings do not have a rear yard. They only have, especially up here on Washington and St. Clair, those properties, they have two fronts and then they have a side yard.
Mhm.
So in the instance where the guidelines say that the building should be in a rear yard and not in front or side yards, in this instance, the zoning ordinance allows for storage buildings in a side yard. So if they think that it's appropriate, they could approve a certificate to have a storage building, detached garage, something like that in a side yard.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my point there is the way that this is written, it says the commission may when A is there's this conflict and B is and there is substantial justification. So I think, should that be or? These seem to be two different things. Like there could be
Probably.
a conflict versus the way that this is written, both of these things have to exist before they could deviate.
Yes, that makes. I can ask the commission if they would like to have both of them, if that was the intent, or if it was either or.
Right. The way it's written though, both of these have to exist
Right.
Yeah.
before you can do anything. And I do not think that was their intention.
Right, I agree with you.
It looks, I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with it. It looks like they want both, that where there's a conflict, they have to have substantial justification to change the design guidelines is to fly in the face of them or to avoid them or whatever you call it. I didn't have a,
I guess my point was, but they also, like if the roof issue, the material exists, there is no conflict between the zoning ordinance and the guidelines. And the way this is written, both of these things have to exist before they can act under this provision. So I think there's other stuff that they want to do that wouldn't qualify the way that this is written.
Okay, then maybe it needs to be rewritten, but I think if they find I took this to mean if there is a conflict identified between the two, they have to have a substantial justification to ignore the guidelines and go with the zoning ordinance. If
Right, but
that's
I-
not what this says, then yes, we do need to change it.
But I think they also want, in the first part of it, if there's a conflict or these other things, and there's a substantial justification. I just don't think that the roof thing you could do the way that this is written. So,
Because there's not a conflict to start with,
correct.
technically. I
Yeah.
guess.
Zoning ordinance versus.
Yes, and
I
just
see
the
what
way
you
that
mean.
this is written, both of these circumstances have to exist.
Mhm.
Which I think that's true for the conflict situation, but I think you also, from what you're saying, is they want to use it in other situations. And I don't think you could the way that this is written.
I don't think your or helps though, because if you don't have the first part,
No, I
then the
think you
rest of
need
it
an
doesn't have-
or and
yeah.
then something and then an and.
yeah.
So, well, let's marinate on that and open the public hearing and then we can have some discussion before we get into our discussion. Unless there's any other questions. All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone here this evening to speak to this matter? Anyone on Zoom?
We have no hands raised.
Oh,
One gentleman did.
if you just say your name and,
Clinton Davis, 219 Sunnyside. One of the members, I guess maybe two of the members, one of the members at least on this about knows I've talked about this at one time. And I have two houses that are I live on Sunnyside, 219 Sunnyside and 404 Sunnyside. Now, I'm reading this out of my family tree. And I will alliterate on about a little more, because this is with the State Library of Virginia. And it mentions, this was done by Leighton Betcher, who did the family tree of the Tates and the Bransons. Stuart Tate, from this estate, bought from Robert G. Bickle on May 3rd, 1887, at public auction in front of the Augusta County Courthouse between Sunnyside and Baptist Alley. We call that Baptist Alley. One-story building on Sunnyside and a small plank house on the west of on Baptist Alley, by Baptist Alley. This was conveyed to Bickle by F.B. Mann on September 10th, 1862. Stuart Tate, who was my great-grandfather, paid $135 between the property at the highest bidder at the courthouse between Sunnyside and Baptist. And in and the house that I live in, it has the mortar in that house predates Portland cement. And we're outside the Stewart addition because of the high school, Booker T. Washington High School, which is D. Webster Davis High School, elementary school there. But this is past the outside of that, remnants of the borders that you're talking about. Now, would that affect the houses that are in those neighborhoods of all the historic districts? Because, like I said, my house and 404 Sunnyside is where my mother's family lived. That was the Bransons. They owned a brickyard where Edgewood Road and Westmoreland, all of that, they made, this is, I'll jump over to the Bransons. Now the Bransons, this is Joseph Branson. He was most likely born slave. He was the son of Levi and Phoebe Branson. Somewhere along the way, he acquired training as a brick mason. My grandfather on the Tate side, he was a mason graduate of Hampton Institute, class of 1909. And getting back to Branson, Joseph Branson and his wife, Mildred Branson, owned right much property in downtown Staunton. during this time. Joseph Branson not only was a bricklayer, but he also owned the brickyard that manufactured brick. In the Staunton Chancery between 1906 and 1933, it was slated that during April and May of 1895, Joseph Branson manufactured 100,000 brick. In July of 1895, he manufactured another 120,000 brick. He had several men working with him for him, and in the brickyard. Joseph Branson owned other property in addition to his residence. And in 1895, he owned 611 Baptist Street Alley that he rented out, and he owned other property on Provence Street as well as Sunnyside. Now, like I said, these two properties are now the Tate House is in my possession, along with there was my uncle's house behind me that my granddaddy built off of the north wall in 1953, and he didn't finish it in 1954 because he died.
So are you asking if
In
these
the surrounding,
changes,
the change would affect all of these historic areas in Staunton? And like I said, this is outside, I'm about a block up from all of this. And
not in the
anybody,
historic?
right,
Okay.
everybody that's in these different historic, whether they touch or not, what you're talking about, how much will that affect? I know the price because the house beside the D. Webster Davis house, D. Webster Davis School, 3 years ago went from $89,000 to $450,000.
Well, so
That's crazy.
to answer your question, and thank you for your comments and your history, but to answer your question, so these revisions
Yeah.
apply to the historic preservation district.
Right.
So they only apply to those. Now, how that will,
That's the part I'm talking about, what would happen. Because like I said, there was a house right beside the school 2 years ago, went from 89,000, a hole in the wall. If you look at the assessor at 2018, looked like a hole in the wall, which I sat there and watched it. And then like I said, my house is 10 and all. Those houses around in that area, it went from 89,000 to $450,000, and my house is assessed at 155.
that is beyond this commission's area of expertise.
Well,
That's a call to the
I'm
assessor's office. to
I'm
see.
afraid that's what they said, but like I said, you're talking is comprehensible. What I'm throwing all these, the people don't know this. If you want to see this is all with the state. I got it with the State Library of Virginia. I have handed out different people. I can't tell you how many people I've handed this information out to, but like I said, this has to be involved somewhere or later. Somebody's going to ask some of these questions with this assessor. It involves the comprehensive plan and everything else. They're going to know what the H is going on. You know what I mean? And I mean, this is. I mean, they coming to me sometime. I mean, I'm saying sometime, a whole lot, asking these questions. I say, who downtown?
All right.
So, but that's what I know it starts out, but like I said, it's a whole lot of, the people outside these revenues, outside these places, these districts are asking questions too. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No Zoom.
No hands
All right.
raised.
See no one else. I will close the public hearing and the matter rests with the commission. Does anybody have any further discussion on what or thoughts on that provision before?
Madam Chair, staff would request that we table it.
Okay,
That way I can get clarification from the Historic Preservation Commission and make sure that we get it right so that we wouldn't have to do another exception.
and maybe at least call this particular provision to the city attorney's office on this sort of two issues. I think that would be great. Does anybody have a motion to that effect?
Or any other
Or any
comments
other,
on?
yeah,
Anything else we need to consider in that motion? How are you doing over here?
Great, how you doing?
Anyone?
On the basis that the amendments will, okay, let's see. Okay, on the basis that the amendments will serve the, no. On the basis that it would help, we would like to table this motion until the next meeting.
This matter.
If I don't have to sound like a lawyer, I can make sense out of it. Excuse me.
That's fine. I take no offense.
That would
Do
somebody
I have a
please second it?
second?
Second.
Get me off.
All
the-
right.
For not being out of practice of making motions.
It having been moved and seconded that we table this matter to give staff time to look at the issues raised during the discussion this evening. I ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Mr. Kessicker,
Aye.
Ms. Wiegand,
Aye.
Mr. Hanson,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you. All right.
No,
Turning to our last item of new business, item 3D, public hearing and consideration of an amendment to chapter 18.50 P1 Professional District of Title 18 zoning of the Staunton City Code. Mr. Hartless, planning manager for the city, will present the staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Melissa Swan has requested a zoning text amendment to allow florist shops as a use permitted on review in our P1 professional districts. Ms. Swan recently purchased property at 2010 North Augusta Street with the intention of relocating her business, which is Honeybee's Florist. However, 2010 North Augusta Street is zoned professional, and our professional zoning districts do not allow for florist shops as a permitted use, nor as a use permitted on review. So Ms. Swan has requested that we amend our P1 professional district regulations to allow florist shops to be permitted on review, which means that they could be permitted with a special use permit issued by city council. Staff would be opposed to florist shops as a by right use, but we are willing to support a request to make it a use permitted by special use permit. And we are recommending that Planning Commission authorize this amendment so that we can draft the necessary changes. Ms. Swan, our applicant, is here tonight. This is not a public hearing, but since she is the applicant for the ZTA, it's up to your discretion if you would like her to speak or if you have any questions for her. I'm sure she'd be happy to come up and answer those.
Any questions for staff?
No.
Ms. Swan, would you like to say anything?
Incredibly nervous. So I mean, I guess I'm just curious if you all have any questions. I basically have been in the floral business for about 30 years and owned Honeybees, started Honeybees Florist 20 years ago next week. And we figured it was time to basically have a real estate rather than paying rent for another 20 years. It was time to do some. So Dr. Stathis and I began our discussions and he thought, well, it'd be a great place to turn into a florist. It's got your required area requirements are already met with parking, height requirements of the building. It meets all area requirements. So I guess the biggest contingency is the fact that that it's zoned professional. I guess I consider it as a professional industry because we deal with churches and we have access codes and keys and things beyond your typical retail organization. So I thought we were kind of a professional industry, but that was my very big faux pas and not understanding code. But unfortunately, here we are. And we would just love to turn this into a florist. We feel like it really wouldn't impinge upon traffic. We've kind of already proven that we have, information to support the fact that we don't really have a lot of walk-in business. Most of our business is on the website and keyed in by the phone. So a lot of our business is delivery. It's not specifically at the flower shop and wouldn't impinge upon traffic coming in and out of that establishment and mess with the corridor in any way. And we're hoping with those kind of basic guidelines that we would be allowed in this instance because we do meet area requirements and we wouldn't really have any more traffic than Dr. Stathos does at a medical practice and selling eyeglasses downstairs. I think that's why he also didn't even think about the zoning requirements, because he was able to sell glasses and things downstairs as a retail. And I know we are listed as a retail, but we feel like a florist is a little bit more specialized service, which is what we would love to have your consideration to allow us to continue to run business there about 200 yards from where we currently are. I don't know if you have any questions. I'd be happy
I
to
did
try
have
to
one
answer.
question, and you touched on it a little bit with respect to your business, but would you say in general, the florist industry as a whole has gone more online and less foot traffic?
It is. A lot of people, not necessarily in speaking of COVID, but just generally in the last 30 years, it's become online. People like to see what they're getting. They like an image of what they're choosing. So they do tend to select 1-800-Flowers or Teleflora because they can get a visual of what aesthetically works for the situation they're trying to send flowers for. We do find ourselves to be a little bit more of a custom shop, but we still have dealt with our clients long enough. They do trust the fact and they give us, the situation that needs to be dealt, whether it's a sympathy or a wedding or a tribute or a birthday or whatever it needs to be to fill those needs. And a lot of that can happen over the phone unless it's a specific event, say a funeral or a wedding, that we would have an in-meeting kind of thing. But a lot of it, we have a website that has tremendous traffic. We get a lot of our business there and we have documentation to support our credit card sales are more than half of, and the documentation from the credit card company shows that most of it's keyed in over the phone, getting people's address and their credit card to run their card over the phone. It's not actually present. So we can kind of show that most of our business is in the area, not necessarily at the florist, but it has changed a lot. We do have a decent amount of traffic because we're in a strip mall. So we do kind of play part with the pizza shop and the hairdresser and the bank. And, so they kind of come in to check us out while they're waiting on their pizza, things like that. But generally, unless it's a really specific need, it's over the phone or email, or people like to kind of correspond that way. So there's like a paper trail, if you will.
Perfect.
Does
Thank
that make
you.
sense?
It does.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
If I may.
Absolutely.
So just sort of thinking about, again, sort of an average volume, if you will. Guesstimate how many walk-in customers you have in a day versus how much delivery traffic do you have going in and out on the regular?
We could probably have better documentation for this because we have cameras, we basically have 10 to 15 customers walking a day, but we
Okay.
have probably 15 to 20 deliveries a day. And in that day, we'll take 10 or 20 deliveries for the following day. So I say it's half,
Okay.
half, what we would, that makes sense. Sorry.
Yes, let me rephrase the delivery question. That might help. So like if I'm thinking of pizza delivery, it's constant. Like you got in, out, it's a lot of traffic generation, if you will. But like florist delivery, I vision differently. Like I'm going to go deliver today's worth of deliveries kind of all at one time, or is it more like back and forth kind of delivering system?
Kind of in zones, if you will. So like just for today, we had deliveries that went to Fishersville. We were playing catch up from the snowstorms. We had a quadrant that went to Fishersville and those people requested by lunchtime if we could. So our driver puts bags over everything and protect them from freezing, takes them to the Fishersville locations first. We have to be at the hospital by noon so the volunteers can get them to the room. So we tend to head to that area around lunchtime because that's the hospital requirements. And, that's what the folks wanted today. The other folks were, some were at home yesterday for their birthday, but now they were at work. They wanted us to reschedule it to take it to Verona. So we had a Verona run, a Fishersville run, a Staunton run, and we were so booked up with that, we couldn't take the Fishersvilles. And the Churchville order that came in. We just
Okay.
couldn't stretch ourselves that thin, but we typically do cover all over the county any given day. So it varies. Usually the driver comes in 3 or 4 times to take rounds of deliveries.
Okay. So that's what I was getting. So it's like 3, 4, 5 kind of trips
Yes.
with multiple deliveries kind of per trip, if you will.
Yes, and there
Gotcha.
might be 7 to 12 people that come in a day that need
Yeah.
a little bouquet to go or a little wrapped rose or, want to talk about something for the future, say it's a funeral or something like that. And that would be that kind of traffic, but it's definitely half of what would be
Sure.
delivered in a various day. We delivered from 9 a.m. all the way to 4.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanh you. Sorry, I was fumbling
No,
over myself.
you were perfect. Any discussion? There is no public
Sorry.
hearing.
Thank you, ma'am.
I guess I should say, I did speak. This
So-
is not a public hearing yet at this
So
juncture.
in thinking about sort of, again, and I kind of think I had the same notion as you did about how florists tend to work these days where it's it does feel less retail-y, if you will, even though it is still technically retail. But the other thing I was thinking about was this property in comparison to a lot of our professional district. And I kind of look at it, there's almost two different feels, if you will. There's a lot of professional district where there's absolutely no parking near or around other than the on-street stuff, because a lot of it's sort of that downtown, going out of downtown corridor. But then you kind of have half the professional district that is a building with a parking lot kind of feel. And that's what we have here, is a building with a parking lot that's frankly kind of set up for retail in a lot of ways. So I guess I kind of like the thought process of being able to take a business and take a property or a structure or whatever and make certain that it makes sense, which I think is what's being asked of us, is to allow for this type of business on a specific lot, because they have to come in and request I think it's a special use permit.
Yes, I think the
Um,
special
I
use
think it makes
permit
perfect sense to me.
element is what makes
Whereas,
this work.
whereas even this kind of business might not work in some of the other parts of the
Mhm.
P1 district.
And I think that was staff's hesitancy to recommend just a straight out
Yeah.
change.
By right.
I think so
By
too.
right.
And I
Thank you.
think this particular location, it's a suitable use, but there are other professional districts like
Mhm.
the west side of Lewis Street or the block of Calorama, between Calorama and East Beverly. They wouldn't be very good locations for this kind of use.
Right.
So the special use permit process allows us to look at each request individually.
Yeah.
Tim, have you guys encountered any other uses that might be beneficial to include as a special use permit review aside from florist?
I've been thinking about that. I haven't thought of any uses specifically, but I'm wondering if we should try to word this vaguely enough that it could be a florist or it could be some other kind of retail sales that was primarily by phone or internet or
With limited.
with
traffic.
limited public
Foot traffic.
or less frequent public foot traffic, yeah.
That was kind of the reason for my question, just to see if you could grab a bigger swipe of it with one ordinance change.
That was something that that had intended to talk to Ms. Nesselrod about when we were drafting the amendment, about
The
how we
actual
wanted to
amendment.
word that, what term we wanted to use. Maybe it needed to be
What color
broader
on
than
that
just
map
forest.
are the professional zones?
The professional districts on that map are the lighter colored green
Okay, yeah,
areas. You'll see a lot of it on North Augusta Street, some on North Coulter, the west side of Lewis, and then a 2 or 3 block square between East Beverly and Calorama, Market and Coulter. That's primarily where those professional districts are.
I'm comfortable with the florist right now. I can see how that would work, and I appreciate the discussion and the information that we've gotten about it. I'm nervous about changing it on the spot here without thinking about it. So I'm in favor of this, and maybe if you wanted to come forward later with some more special use permit uses, potential ones, I would be fine with looking at a expansion of the list.
At this point, I think we're just authorizing them to draft.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
So I think it would,
Way ahead of myself here.
yeah,
Sorry.
and that's my fault. I called it a public hearing. I got overzealous with all the public hearings. But,
We could-
so we're gonna get to see the language
Okay.
next month before.
Okay,
And-
then I'm fine with considering additional special use permit uses.
And Ms. Swan's in a bit of a hurry, so I don't think we'll go too far out on that limb, trying to expand the language.
Mhm.
Because next month, we would like to run the public hearing on this amendment and also a
Public
special
hearing
use
on-
permit
on
for
her
her.
request. Yes, double one, yeah. Yeah.
Any other discussion? Then do we have a motion to authorize staff?
It's a half a question. If
Oh,
you
I'm
don't
sorry,
mind.
I
It's
didn't
okay. It
mean
came
to-
to me. No. If you guys did come up with a little bit more robust list or a little bit slight modification, would we be allowed to modify that list and still vote on it next month? Or would that sort of make us have, like, if you came with 5 things and we said, we're good with 4 of them, can we still vote on it
Oh,
at that point and
yeah.
sort of strike
And then-
that, or?
I'll try to word the ad so that any modifications you make would be less restrictive. That way we don't
Yeah.
have to re-advertise.
I think that's kind of what we're all saying, it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be perfect.
Are we ready?
I am.
On the basis that, wait, I'm going to make sure I got the right one this time. It's all confusing. On the basis that the amendment would serve the interests of public necessity, convenience, general welfare, and good zoning practice, I move that we authorize staff to work with the applicant to draft the necessary amendment to SCC 18.50 P1 Professional District.
I'll second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that planning commission authorize staff to work on the zoning text amendment. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Hanson,
Aye.
Ms. Wiegand,
Aye.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Aye.
Mr. Kessinger,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
It does not appear that we have either any old business or other business on the agenda. Is that still the case?
Yes, ma'am, that's still the case.
All right, then I will turn to actions of city council. Do you have any information?
At their February 13th meeting, City Council approved a special use permit for 17 single-family attached townhomes at 2311 Morse Mill Road. And they also approved a special use permit for 308, or I'm sorry, for 206 Frontier Drive for 308 multifamily apartments, which would actually be 154 in phase 1. And then just an update on the other item that you all heard last month, the special use permit for 217 West Beverly Street. That request has been withdrawn and it will not go to city council.
Are there, the next item on the agenda is matters from the public. Are there any other matters other than those we've already discussed this evening that anyone would like to discuss with council? I mean, the commission? No one on Zoom?
We do have
Oh,
someone on Zoom.
all right. Good evening. You come up as KM.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
have
hi.
any matters?
Yes, I'm going to try to read something. My name is Karen Magno. I just have a quick statement I'd like to read on behalf and representing the Board of Directors for the Old South Village Homeowners Association.
Okay, and could you give us your address, please?
My address is 303 Stonewall Jackson Boulevard.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. In the spring of 23, I was president at the time and I requested a walkthrough with the city. And a few other board members were also involved in that so that we could show them the problems we were seeing and being told were problems by our residents up in section 3. That is Chamberlain Drive. That's the section of Old South Village that was built just before the current one that's being finished up of section 4. That was spring of 23. We were essentially told there really wasn't anything that the city could do about the conditions of the sidewalks and the pavement because that had already been turned over to the city. The city owned it. There was nothing they could do essentially to hold the developer accountable for the work that was done or the lack of good work. In October of 24, this past October, I conducted a walkthrough with Jeremy Bailey, who's also a board member, with a gentleman from Public Works whose name escapes me right now. But that was in October of 24. We walked all of section 4, which is the one that has yet to be turned over to the city, to show him all of the problems that are up there on the 400 and up section of Stonewall Jackson Boulevard and all of Rolling Ridge Court and the sidewalks. Lots of broken sidewalks, uneven. We've already had one child trip and break an arm who lives up there. He seemed a little overwhelmed, but was going to get with his superiors. He was very concerned about the conditions. Fast forward to January of 25, and we have a new president, Dennis Moody, for the board. And in the beginning of January, he requested a walkthrough, maybe it was the end of January, with the city again with Section 4 so that he could get caught up to speed and also show them the concerns, because we hadn't heard anything from anyone from the October walkthrough. So that walkthrough, we were told, was going to take place in a couple of weeks. Fast forward again to this past Monday, and Dennis, who also lives in that Section 4, happened to notice lots of commotion and cars up near his house, and he realized that it was the walkthrough. It was being done by the city. They'd invited D.R. Horton, the builders, and Augusta Opportunities, but not the board, who was the entity that requested the walkthrough in the first place. So, needless to say, he was not particularly happy, but he inserted himself into that walkthrough. I just wanted to reiterate, after a phone conversation that Adam Campbell had and Blake Shepard had with Dennis, myself, and another board member today over the phone, we were expressing our concerns about the fact that the city may be, in fact, considering returning some of the bond to this developer before this work is done. The developer was very unhappy, according to Dennis's report of the meeting, the walkthrough, that he was going to have to pay for the repair work. So I just want to reiterate our grave concerns that we have up here. We've watched, since I've been here in 2021 is when I moved here, I have watched all of Stonewall Jackson up to the 400 block of it be completely disassembled and rebuilt at the cost of, I don't know what, because I haven't been able to get that figure, but the city's pocketbook opened up to pay for that. I see how everything else is aging here. Chamberlain is not aging well, the sidewalks, and then we're trying to be proactive here with Section 4, only to find out that the city is considering returning a portion of the $500,000 bond to the developer so that they can get going on Section 5. I just wanted to express our great concern and hope that the city will do right by its taxpayers first and foremost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else on Zoom?
We may have someone. Yes, we do.
Do you have a name? Okay. Mr. Lewis?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I just like, how you doing? Zach Lewis, Rockaway Street, Staunton, Virginia. I'd just like to thank Ms. Wiggins and there was a couple other council members there for coming to the Building Bridges meeting, kind of explaining a little bit to us about the comprehensive plan as it affects Uniontown. And I'd just like to invite the rest of you to come at any point in time. We have a meeting the third Monday in each month for the open meeting. So thank you, Ms. Wiggins.
And where do you meet?
Oh, at Augusta Street, United Methodist Church.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Anyone else?
Oh, ma'am.
On. I would like to introduce our newest planner, Maggie Roche. She's our comprehensive planner, started working with the city last month. I believe all of you have received at least emails from her. A lot of you also probably met her at the open house on the comprehensive plan. I believe that was day 2 for Maggie. So she's jumping right in and helping out. She is also coordinating all the stakeholder meetings on the comp plan update. I think we've had 5 or 6 very successful stakeholder meetings to this point, and we have several more scheduled in the coming weeks. And she will be presenting at future meetings when we have projects such as the comp plan update or working on small area plans, the comprehensive rezoning that will be taken on this spring. Maggie will be leading that effort. So just want to welcome Maggie.
Welcome. The next planning commission meeting will be next month on March 20th, 2025.
Would you like a motion to adjourn?
Yes, ma'am.
I move we adjourn the meeting
Thank you all.
and move on to the Citizens
Part 2.
Advisory Committee.